Hi everyone. I'm Wyanet. I'm Comanche, and I've been working with children and youth for about the past 10 years in a couple of different settings. I graduated from Colorado College, and my major was in neuroscience, so I studied a lot on brain development, brain anatomy, trauma on the brain, things like that. I worked at a residential treatment facility for youth under the age of 18, which was like a step down from a lock-in facility, basically. I've worked in schools in the special ed departments. I've worked in a youth-specific homeless shelter, and we served youth from the ages of 15 to 21. And then I worked in a HUD-funded housing program for youth, and that was from ages 18 to 25. A majority of these youth that I've worked with have had experiences with exposure to domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, teen dating violence, and definitely trafficking, especially with the homeless youth. I've had a lot of years working with special populations, like with developmentally disabled, intellectually disabled individuals, and with LGBTIQ youth. So through all of these organizations that I've been involved with, I've gotten a lot of background on trauma responses, trauma-informed care, the crisis responses that you might need to go through with youth, confidentiality and safety planning, and building community support. Right now, I am the Children and Youth Program Coordinator at Redwind Consulting. Redwind does a variety of trainings and different activities to help tribes at whatever level that they're at. And so I do different presentations and organization of webinars, of conferences, so like the conference back in April on children and youth, and then other trainings. I'm available over the phone, over email, and then I can do visits on children and youth specific issues, so domestic violence, teen dating violence, stalking, sex assault, and trafficking. I used to serve on the board of directors at One Nation Walking Together. It's a local agency that's their mission statement is that they're committed to making a positive difference in the lives of Native American Indians living on reservations, as well as providing programs for urban Indians. I'm a guest writer for Wings Foundation, which is based out of Denver, and I write on topics around childhood sexual abuse. And then I also participate in the Native American Advisory Council through a program called the Emerging Leaders Development Program, and it's through El Pomar. So thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to go over sexual assault and sexual violence in our Native youth populations, which is a really big problem. We'll talk about different forms of sexual abuse, or sexual assault, I apologize, rates that are happening in our Native youth, advocacy practices that will really help, and then the impact that this is having on our youth, and then how to reduce the impact. If you have any questions, definitely chat them in the chat box down at the bottom, and then periodically I'll be asking for some feedback, and you can type in some answers there too. So the Office on Violence Against Women and OVW, they define sexual assault as any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. So falling under the definition of sexual assault are sexual activities like forced sexual intercourse, forcible sodomy, child molestation, incest, fondling, and attempted rape. Wikipedia defines it as a form of sexual violence that includes rape, groping, forced kissing, or the torture of a person in a sexual manner. Some terms that I guess one of these terms are kind of new is revenge porn, that you might want to be on the lookout with your youth especially. And this typically happens either when teens are sharing sexually explicit photos or if they're sexting, which is when they use text messaging to send sexually explicit messages or photos to each other. In revenge porn, there's typically a breakup, and then the hurt party then shares those sexually explicit photos and content with either their friends or they'll put it on the internet, those kind of things. And then the term groping is used to define either touching or fondling of another person in a sexual way using hands, and that's without a person's consent. There's also different kinds of rapes. So a couple of examples, acquaintance rape is the most prevalent. Then there's intimate partner, which when we're thinking about youth, that corresponds with teen dating violence. Then there's stranger rape, which is rare. And then I think especially for teens, you'll hear more about gang rapes. So you'll hear about that typically at parties, but not necessarily always at parties. Perpetrators of sexual violence will use a lot of different tactics. So they could do threats, which might include physical harm to the victim or harm to animals. Coercion, which is basically a lack of choice without a severe consequence. So it can include things like no one's going to believe you, or if you don't do this sexual act for me, then I won't give you a ride home, and this person has to walk 20 miles home. They're just stranded. Or the person might just talk you into it, or say something like, well, I'll go somewhere else for this. So if it's in a teen dating violence context, then the teens are pressured to do these sexual activities because they don't want to lose the relationship. And then they'll feel guilt. They might feel like it's their duty. The perpetrator might accuse the other person of cheating and saying, well, if you don't do this for me, then you must be cheating on me. Those are all examples. They might use exploitation, so kind of like that revenge porn. If they've ever had sexually explicit photos, they might threaten to send them out to friends. They might use deceit and lie, or straight out force. They might also target people with mental incapacitations, so people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, or people with mental health issues. And then some of them use the power of authority. And when we talk about authority in youth, it's really someone who can tell a youth what to do. So there's a lot of different people in youth lives that can tell them what to do. We've got teachers, we've got coaches, we've got spiritual leaders, we have police officers. So people who we think of in positions of power and authority who are in that authority and using it to sexually exploit someone. So our tribal values really do value individual autonomy and respect. Our tribal oral traditions and our stories and our dialogues typically describe the right of women to make sexual choices and so a freedom from sexual assault. A really great book to check out if you're interested is by Sarah Deer, and it's called The Beginning and End of Rape. She talks a lot about the historical context and kind of links it to cultural things that are going on today, and it has a lot of really great information on this kind of stuff. Something to really think about when we're talking about sexual assaults of our Native young women is that link between colonization and rape. The last slide I talked about some tactics used by perpetrators, and one tactic that I'll bring up now is called genocidal rape. So it's a tactic and it's a tool, and it's basically rape as a form of extinction. So it's a policy of rape for the purpose of genocide. Amnesty International defines it as a pre-planned and deliberate military strategy. It's systematically permitted, it's calculated, group destruction is the goal. It can drive a wedge in our communities, and it shatters our societies. And the intent and meaning is to destroy people. Sometimes the goal might be to impregnate women, to kind of dilute the blood and cause disappearance of a race in that way. It can also ostracize women if the women are ostracized in their community, and then she's basically neutralized as a member of that community, and she's not a member of a group that anymore. Women are viewed as the object in which the group destruction occurs in this context. And it's not just about women, but also their identity in a certain group. So it's this combination of racism and sexism. The term genocidal rape is controversial, so I'm not saying anything for or against it. It's just something to think about. You definitely have to prove that the specific intent was to destroy through rape. But we do know that U.S. policies facilitated the sexual assault of Native people during colonization and boarding school eras, and with the Major Crimes Act, and with the policy of termination. So it's just something to think about when you're thinking about all of the big problems with sexual assault that we're seeing in our communities. We also know that there's accounts of trafficking way back in the gold rush era, which is very similar to what we're seeing in the camps right now. So sexual assault is a very violent crime, and it causes life-altering trauma. Most tribes are at the beginning stages of addressing sexual assault. Up on the slide are some prevalence of sexual assaults in our communities. So keeping in mind that Native American women have 2 times the rate of other groups, here's some stats from RAINN, which is R-A-I-N-N online. So the victims of sexual assault, 15% of them are under 12 years old. 29% are ages 12 to 17, and 44% of victims are under the age of 18. So this is almost half of our victims. 90% of rapes are done to women. So we tend to talk about women as being the victim, and I recognized with a lot of individuals that's not the case, but because 90% of rape victims are women, we tend to gender the crime, just so you know. A couple of stats on LGBT individuals. 1 in 8 lesbian women and nearly 50% of bisexual women and men experience sexual assault in their lifetimes. Nearly 4 in 10 gay men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. And 64% of transgender people have experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. Victims of sexual assault are more likely to suffer from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. They're more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol because of the trauma. They're more likely to contemplate suicide. On average, 68% of sexual assaults go unreported, and 98% of rapists will not spend time in jail. The average age of a rapist is 31 years old. In the United States in general, 52% of the offenders are white. Juveniles accounted for 16% of forcible rape arrestees. So these are young youth who are being arrested for rapes. You can see this in teen dating violence and just in sexual assaults. And then 11% of rapes involve the use of weapons. So if you look up at the slide, Native American women are more likely to be assaulted by multiple perpetrators. We're also more likely to have weapons used against us. And then 73% of sexual assaults are perpetrated by non-strangers. So most of these guys are known, definitely. So with the high rates of sexual violence combined with almost a community tolerance or normalization of sexual violence, mixed in with this multi-generational trauma and then lack of offender accountability, creates this constant danger in the lives of Native women, and it's a threat to the stability of our tribes. I know a lot of women who will say that either they themselves or women that they know have said things to their daughters about, well, when you're assaulted, when you're sexually assaulted, when you're raped. It's not an if in their minds, it's a when. And that's really sad that our youth are dealing with this. So Native teens are more likely to be date raped or sexually assaulted by drug facilitation. Can anyone in the chat box guess which drug is the highest drug used in drug-facilitated rape? Which one is most common? So Tammy says alcohol. Are there any other guesses? Well, Tammy, you are absolutely right. It is alcohol. Other things used but not used as frequently would be like GHB or roofies or ketamine, but they're definitely not used as much as alcohol. So when we talk about victims who are incapacitated, just realize that that was done on purpose. This was a drug-facilitated sexual assault. Perpetrators look for women who are under the influence of alcohol to perpetrate on. Girls ages 16 through 24 have the highest rates of intimate partner violence. So when we think about teen dating violence, it really links in with the power and control wheel that we see in domestic violence. So you'll see things like intimidation, you'll see emotional abuse, you'll see isolation. He'll try to separate her from her friends and family. You'll see that minimizing, the denying, the blaming. If they are either a couple that have a child together or just a teen mom, the children might be used against her, just like in domestic violence. And then you'll see those coercions and the threats. So there's a definite link between intimate partner violence and then teen dating violence as a like precursor before it becomes domestic violence as adults. And you'll see date rape in there with the teen dating violence. And then our Native youth have really a limited amount of access and help to getting orders for protection. They don't get orders for protection very often. Does anyone have any ideas about why that is? Why can't our youth get orders for protection? They might be too young. Any other ideas? And if it helps, think about why adults don't get orders for protection either. Because there's some similarities. Embarrassed. Mm-hmm. So it's usually someone they know and they don't want to get them in trouble. Definitely. If it's a teen dating violence situation and you don't want to split up with your partner, then you're going to want to keep it secret. You're going to be embarrassed. You're not going to want to get them in trouble. You don't want to be labeled a snitch. I think that a lot of people in general don't know the full extent of the laws and what's available to them. And so that extends into our youth. There's an even bigger lack of knowledge around what laws can protect them and what's available to them. There's also a limited amount of police involvement in teen dating violence. They typically don't get involved. It's one of those things that adults think is puppy love, so they kind of brush it off. Oh, they're just kids. They're just figuring out this whole dating thing, when it's really dangerous situations. And then I think a lot of teens might go to school counselors too, and school counselors don't know what's available either and might not be the most helpful as far as getting them the help that they need. So I would encourage making yourselves available to youth as you're going along so that they know that you're there when they can't get help in other places. So on the screen is the federal consent laws. Different jurisdictions do change these laws. This is just the federal law. So you'll hear about things like Romeo and Juliet laws, and those are local laws, like state laws. And those will either reduce sentencing or make it so that the perpetrator doesn't have to register as a sex offender, or it'll outline different age differences. So I would encourage you all to look up all of your state laws and your local laws to make sure that you know what your specific consent rules are. So advocacy for teens, the biggest thing is we need to find more people who work with youth and who are trained to work with youth. Sexual assault disempowers our youth, so making decisions is so important so that we can avoid re-traumatizing them. This control has been taken away from them. They need that back. So they need to make as many decisions as possible. They need to have as many choices as possible. So as an advocate, when you first go in, you'll want to immediately assess their needs and their safety. So talk to them first about confidentiality and mandatory reporting, because you don't want them to disclose and then have to backtrack and go, oh, by the way, I have to report this. It really hurts the trust that they might have had in you. So know your laws, your policies, know all of that stuff, your tribal codes, your federal laws, your state laws, your program policies before you even start doing this, because you'll need to tell your teams that you're working with under what circumstances you have to report. If you're having trouble looking them up, I'm going to type a website up here. So you can go to RAIN. Oop, I can type it. So you can go to this website and you can look up laws in your state around mandatory reporting. And RAIN is a really helpful website too on sexual assault. If the youth comes in with their parents, always keep focus on the youth. The victim is your client, not the parents. They might have very different ideas on what they want advocacy to look like, but your client is the victim. So you really want to get into a place where you can talk one-on-one with your clients. I was doing advocacy a while ago with a young lady who came in with her mom, and mom was a wreck, understandably so, but she talked over her daughter, and so her daughter just started coloring and not making eye contact with either of us. So I asked mom to kind of step aside. I'm like, I need to, work with your daughter, and I want to build a relationship with her. You can say whatever you need to say to separate yourself at that moment, but I'm like, I want to establish a rapport with your daughter so that we're on a good working condition. So could you step over here or talk to one of my colleagues or read a book or something outside of the office so that I can be one-on-one? As soon as mom stepped away, daughter just unloaded, told me all kinds of things. I definitely told her about mandatory reporting and confidentiality before she started talking, but she really did need someone to talk to, but couldn't do it in front of mom. Either because she was embarrassed, she didn't want to tell her mom details. There's that shame that goes on with sexual assault that you might not want your mom to know about, certain things that were done to you, and that's totally understandable. So try to get one-on-one with your clients, to get with them and to know what they want. As an advocate, you are a biased supporter. You are biased, and that is okay. You are on their side. They need someone so desperately on their side, so that's you as an advocate. It's so important to just listen. They just need someone to listen so that they can unload. Believe her and tell her it's not her fault. You'll want to give options and choices and advocate for her interests. So if parents disagree, you're on her side. You can advocate politely for her interests and talk to parents about this is what she wants and the options that are available, and this is what we're choosing to do, and just go with it that way. You're the expert, so you're there to provide that expertise. But you want to prioritize her safety too. Trauma tends to make people not think very clearly. So you'll want to outline these things that will prioritize her safety. Maintain a non-judgmental attitude about anything that she discloses or any situation around it. Definitely maintain that confidentiality. I know that in Indian country we have really small communities and it's really hard sometimes, but if her confidentiality has been depleted, it's a very, very small chance that she'll ever talk to you again or that she'll ever seek services again from anyone else because of that betrayal of trust. So work on confidentiality as best as you can. And you're really there to inform and assist her. So you'll probably want to explain some common reactions and concerns to her because she's not going to know if what she's feeling is, quote, normal. Don't make predictions and don't make suggestions because the ball is in her court and you don't want to make a prediction and get her hopes too high or make a prediction and, something else happens and she blames you. It's just not a good idea to make predictions about the outcome. Talk to her about coping skills. She's probably going to be feeling out of sorts, definitely, after a sexual assault. Or if she's even come in years after a sexual assault, she may have been utilizing these negative coping skills over the years, and you'll want to talk to her about getting more into positive, healthy coping skills. So I've seen a lot of youth who use self-injurious behaviors. So we'll talk about replacing those behaviors when she's feeling stressed out or angry or any of those other emotions so that the cutting or burning, whatever she's doing to herself, we can replace that with something that's not going to hurt her. Be repetitive about the things that you say because it might take a while to kind of sink in, but definitely don't overload with information. It can go step by step over a course of time, and you can be repetitive over that course of time. So as an example, you might want to offer 3 or 4 suggestions or options instead of asking what she needs because she just might not know. If she's in that situation, I don't know why I'm here, I just need help. And that's totally okay. You can give some options and she can choose from them. Be very aware of suicide risk. So there's a little acronym to remember for increase of suicide risk, and it is path warm. So the acronym is ideation for the I, then substance abuse, then purposelessness, then anxiety, trapped, hopeless, withdrawal, anger, reckless, and mood changes. So is path warm? Watch out for those things. The more of those you have, the higher risk. And know that a lot of people fear talking about suicidal ideation like it's going to put a thought in someone's head, and it really doesn't. It's actually the opposite, that if they are thinking about it, they might open up, and that's a good thing because then you can get them help. If they hadn't thought about it, they're not going to start. It's just not on their mind. For health needs, you really want to try to find sane examiners who are experienced with youth. It's really helpful to find a pediatric sane nurse. For those of you who might be unfamiliar, SANE is sexual assault nurse examiner. You always want to encourage medical treatment with a sane provider, not an ER doctor after a sexual assault. ER doctors are great. I'm not, saying that they aren't. But these sane examiners have the necessary training that they know what they're looking for. They're evidence collectors. So even if the teen doesn't want to have a report filed or charges filed or anything like that. If she doesn't want to report it, still encourage her to see a sane examiner because she's going to know what to look like. Your victim can still decline evidence collection. That's totally fine, and you can assure her, but we really want her to see a sane examiner so that they know what kind of injuries to look for. A sane exam can happen up to 92 hours after an assault. Under 72 hours is really optimal. IHS does not have any time regulations. So there's nothing in IHS saying after this time you cannot get a sane exam. Most places who do exams are getting federal funding, so they're out of compliance if they refuse to serve your clients. Your victims also shouldn't have to pay for the forensic exam. They might have to pay for other medical care. So if she has, some big scratch on her arm or something, she might have to pay for that medical care. However, look at victims' comp to look for reimbursing her for those things and getting money so that she can get treated. What you'll want to do when you're working with youth is find out the mandatory reporting for the SANE examiners at different ages. So some SANE examiners might have to do a mandatory report at a certain age. And so you'll need to know that before you go in with your victims so that they're aware. Because under a certain age, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to just say, no, I don't want to report. It's one of those things that it's that child endangerment, and it really does just depend on the age. So check out your local SANE examiners and what they have to report. Because you don't want to make a promise that it's not going to report it when a SANE examiner is going to have to report it. Check in with your victim while she's getting a SANE exam if you're in the room. Just ask her if she's okay. If she's looking uncomfortable, check in with her. Sometimes the nurses can get really quiet during SANE exams, and you talking might prompt the nurse to start talking because we really want to make sure that there's informed consent going all across every step of that SANE exam. So the nurse needs to be checking in and doing informed consent along the process because your victim can stop the process at any time. She's totally okay to do that. She can start it and she can be done. That's really up to her. Definitely let her know about the possible consequences of not continuing, but it's ultimately her choice. If you're in the room during a SANE examination, definitely don't touch any evidence and don't be left alone with it because it is evidence. Don't touch your victim. Don't touch anything in the exam. Just kind of stay back and out of the way. So when you're going through with your victim, you really want to make sure that she understands a couple of different things. So does she understand the medical exam process and the collection of evidence and the timeline that she needs to do it in? Does she know that she can have the exam for health issues, even if the timeline for evidence collection is passed? So if she didn't get a forensic exam within that, 92 hours, but a week later she still is having, some shoulder problem, she can still go in and have that checked out. Does she know where to go for the exam? Does she need transportation for the exam? Does she know that she can stop the exam or refuse any parts of the exam? She could also start and then say no to a couple of things and then continue on with the exam. And then does she know the implications of that choice? And then you want to make sure that she knows that the county will pay for some or all of the exam and how that payment will be arranged. You really want to be that expert for her. That's what she needs. So explain the process. Who's involved, what's involved, what evidence is important, why is it important, that right to refuse. Let her know that you can't predict any legal outcomes from the SANE exam and the evidence collection, and that we do have high rates of declination. Don't make predictions. Again, know it's her choice at every step of the way. Different victims need different things, and everyone's definition of justice is different. So start talking to her about, this is the legal justice system, but what are some other ways that you might want to seek justice or feel like justice inside of you has been, served? Because it can be an inside thing too. And our definition of justice as individuals varies. But a lot of times we can't rely on the legal system to bring that legal justice. You'll want to talk to her about safety planning. And safety planning will be different if it's a teen dating violence situation or if it's like an acquaintance rape that's a one-time thing. It'll definitely be different with your safety planning and what you need to think about. So when you meet with your client, you'll want to bring safety planning information, some resources, contact lists. Maybe you have a packet of information from your office that you want to bring. Maybe a comfort kit. Snacks and water you can totally bring, but they need to wait until after the SANE exam. And then any referral information if you need it. So safety planning is really just preparing for the likelihood of a future incident, and it makes it so that survivors have options to protect themselves when emergency responders either can't respond or they're too far away or it's just impractical. It should be done in a way that develops the survivor's own skills, and you want to help them to continue doing their own safety planning once they're done meeting with you. So think about their short-term and their long-term needs, and then you'll want to revisit it with them and then practice it and make it normal for them. We don't want them to have to pull out a piece of paper to go, what was my safety plan? I don't remember. So when you meet with her, think about, and this is really more for teen dating violence, this is something that's ongoing, the sexual assault. What have you tried in the past? What would you do again? What was the reaction to some of the things that you've tried in the past? What do you think the perpetrator's reaction will be to any new ideas? How do you feel yourself about those new ideas and resources? If you as an advocate or your victim think that there's going to be a new and negative reaction to a strategy, then plan for that reaction if you still want to use the idea. So if you think, this is probably going to get a negative reaction, then what are we going to do? What's step 2 in that plan? And then what needs to happen in advance to make sure those options are available? What kind of things do you need to set up so that you know that this is actually a viable option? Do we as advocates know that these options are actually viable resources? If you know that sending someone to the agency across the street is going to be a horrific experience, I don't suggest sending them across the street. Because if you hear about a bad reference or resource, I just wouldn't suggest it. Ultimately, it is her decision because she's the one who's living with it. So definitely reinforce her autonomy. These are her choices. You're just there to provide that expertise and the help. If your survivor has children, either with the partner in teen dating violence or just as a single mom, you'll want to think about safety planning for school, for childcare. If the child goes to other families' houses or if your victim goes to other families' houses, you'll want to think about those things. We have a lot of single moms. If it's a teen dating violence situation and the perpetrator is well known to the victim, then the offender is pretty aware of where the victim is going and what they're doing. But there's good news. The victim has been surviving, so they're their own experts. We really are just facilitating this process. So you're just helping the victim use their own skills. They are survivors. They're doing great. When you do your safety planning, you'll examine your risk, and then you'll provide and explore some options. And then identify their personal resources as well as those public resources. What does this person already have built in that they can use? And then consider the safety of other victims, so children, siblings, the victim's friends, the victim's family, and help them identify some high danger times. Everyone's situation is different and unique, so the safety planning will be unique every time. It should reflect that the offender is not going to be arrested, because it's unlikely. And during this time, the offender is probably doing some intimidating things to either stop her from continuing along with the prosecution or to prevent her from reporting at all. Technology is something that our youth are using all the time. So I would definitely suggest get some help or training on the different technologies that teens are using. Or, download Snapchat on your phone, download Instagram, play around with these things, go on Facebook, see what they're using, get a Kik account, it's K-I-K. These are things that our teens are using. So you might want to test it out, get familiar with it, because that makes you an even better advocate for when you need to safety plan with her. Because if you don't know how to keep her safe on Kik, then you can't offer suggestions. There is a ton of technology and social media out there, so you don't have to get totally overwhelmed and know everything, but having some basics is really good and it's helpful for them. Explain to your victim the risks and dangers. Sometimes they might underestimate, sometimes they might overestimate, so talk about those things. Sometimes victims might seem more scared than what you think is necessary, but you should really think about how it's being communicated, and maybe it's not just being fully communicated. There's some piece that you're missing that's not being understood. So really her response should guide your work. Her perception of the event should guide you. They might not have that language to communicate their risk, but you can definitely pick up on their emotions and trust her. It's really, really imperative that we just hear her and what she's saying. When you're thinking about teens at school too, you'll want to do school safety planning. So is the perpetrator in her classes? Does she take the bus with the perpetrator, or does the perpetrator know where her classes are so he can follow her around? Is she in a dorm situation, so private schools or colleges? What are some rules around common areas? If she does get an order for protection, how is the school going to help you out? And just so you know, schools are not required to enforce orders for protection, but they are under some legal obligation to keep students safe. So it's kind of tricky. If you want more details on that, let me know. My contact information will be at the end. It's kind of interesting when you're working with schools. So it can be difficult. Typically, you'll want to definitely ask the school to at least give the victim the perpetrator's schedule so that she knows where he will be. And then you'll want to think about, where does she go in the community? Is she safe at home? The safer that she feels, the better decisions she'll make. So you'll want to create a circle of support around her and make her feel safe. Keep your safety plans short and practice them, practice them, practice them. And then you might want to think about third-party involvement. So who are his friends who might want to try to get at her? What family members might want to hassle her? Those kind of things. And then what kind of resources can you offer her? So is there some kind of victim assistance? What kind of medical assistance does she need? Emergency assistance, traditional supports, those are really helpful. And then maybe some conventional supports that she might be interested in. If you have a SART team, which is a sexual assault response team, you'll really want to figure out between you what ages you're looking at. Are you going to tackle issues of an 8-year-old who was sexually assaulted? So really define the ages And maybe you split up SART teams so that there's one for adults and one for teens, children, that kind of thing. But you'll want to get SANE nurses involved, the forensics lab, healthcare practitioners, law enforcement, prosecution, tribal leadership if they're interested and they can, traditional healers, and really any other vested practitioners. Schools should have a Title IX coordinator also, and I always suggest get your Title IX coordinator involved in the SART team because they're the ones who are handling sexual assault and sexual harassment in the schools. If she wants an order for protection, talk to her about it thoroughly, help her fill out that paperwork, and talk her through that legal process. So talking through the legal process, there's some questions that you can think about. So does the victim know that she can choose not to report, either now or ever? Does she understand what it means and the possible consequences of making a delayed report? Does the victim understand your role and your purpose, and that you're an ongoing resource for her? Does she know that it's really, really important to be candid and honest with investigators? She'll need to be honest about events during the assault and leading up to the assault. So really encourage her to stick with the truth, even if she's embarrassed. And it can really feel embarrassing. I always feel for youth that are disclosing to police officers. They typically have this mortified look on their face. But it's really important that they be honest. Does your victim understand that she can stop the interview at any time or take a break and resume her interview at a later date? She can definitely do that when she's talking with law enforcement. Does she know that she can contact the investigator if she remembers details later? Does she know how to contact the investigator? Does she know that an immediate arrest might not be made? And does she know how long approximately that the investigation will take? And then does she understand that she can still do a civil suit for damages? That's always an option too. So you're really her guide on this journey to talk to her about all of her options. So when you think about prosecution and some things that she might need to know, has she taken necessary steps to be notified if the perpetrator has gone to jail on when he's going to be released? There is a system called Victim Information and Notification Every Day. It's VINE, V-I-N-E, that she can register if she hasn't gotten information on how to do that from police officers or prosecution. And as the victim, she has the right to know when the perpetrator will be released. And you can let her know that she can raise any concerns to the prosecutor, and she can also ask to meet with the prosecutor at any time. It's really important to tell her that the defense attorney or investigator is likely to contact her and to guide her through what she needs to do in that situation, because that can be really scary. An attorney calls you and you don't know what to do. You don't know if you have to talk to this person. And then does she understand that she will receive a subpoena from the prosecutor at some point? Then you can talk to her about things like plea negotiations and her role as a witness. If the perpetrator does not go to jail or if he's released, let her know that any future threats or harassment or violence, which includes stalking, either from him or his friends and family, definitely can result in a new criminal case. And then after the SANE exam and the evidence is collected, typically she'll leave the hospital with clothes that the hospital gives her because they've taken the clothes. So let her know that she can request that property back, the property that was used as evidence. A big thing that I think about when I work with teens is I don't try to fix them. They don't need to be fixed. A lot of people think that when a teen comes in, I've got to fix this, I've got to make this better. It's really, you're there to talk to them and guide them. I've done advocacy for a youth who was sexually assaulted a long, long time ago, and she comes in to talk, and we just talk. We talk about coping skills, and we talk about how she's doing and how she's managing, and she's still dealing with the effects of this trauma because it's a lifelong trauma. So I know that I'm not going to fix her. I'm really there to just talk to her. I'm a trustworthy adult that she can talk to. Even if I never see her again, just her being able to talk to someone and making it confidential is so huge. You've done such a good thing for them. It's such a relief to be able to talk to someone and know that it's not going to leave the room. If you have new advocates or if you just want to play around, I always advocate for role-playing. So you might want to role-play like if a teen comes in and discloses something, what are you going to say? What are you not going to say? So that you have practice. So an example is, role-playing things like, it's not your fault, even if you were drunk. You're not alone. Those positive things to say to them so that you know what to say when they disclose. Because disclosures can sometimes be triggering for us as well. And so being prepared is helpful so that you at least have some ideas on how to come at it. Something that we do at Redwind is we do talking while we do arts and crafts. So I told you the story about the girl who came in and she was just coloring while her mom talked. We always have coloring sheets available. We have little craft things, Play-Doh, whatever you're into. It helps them relax, and it's something to do with their hands while they're talking too, which can be helpful. And this works for adults too. It's really just some comfort so that they can have something to do with their hands. And then it'll also make it feel less rushed, which is nice. They'll feel like it's a more relaxed environment. You're just hanging out, you're doing arts and crafts, it's like sister space where you're just creating space for them and you're being there for them. So there's likely not going to be any physical injuries from a sexual assault. It's unlikely. Native women are more likely than the general population to have injuries, but on the whole, it's really unlikely. Our bodies are meant to stretch, and we're very, flexible and resilient to those kind of things. So we push babies out of ourselves, so there's typically not going to be a whole lot of physical injury from a sexual assault. That being said, there can be definite health impacts. So STDs or STIs, so sexually transmitted diseases, urinary tract infections, pelvic inflammatory disease. Early sex is also a risk factor for cervical cancer. So young victims, you can also talk to them about, hey, down the road, make sure you get your pap smear every year. During a sexual assault, there's typically an increase in heart rate and a flow of adrenaline, which basically prepares the body for that fight or flight response. So your body might expel fluids So maybe vomiting or a release of the bladder or bowel. And basically this is just a survival function, and it protects the body from the risk of infection if internal injuries do result from this crisis. So normalize it for her. If she did have a release of her bladder, she's going to be embarrassed. Just let her know this is a totally normal physiological response that her body did. Her body didn't betray her. It's just doing what it did to protect her. A lot of individuals will freeze. It's totally common to freeze up when you're being sexually assaulted. Let her know that's also normal. It's kind of part of that fight, flight, freeze. It's just our body's way of protecting us. Crisis can cause some physical senses to become more heightened, and then others might shut down. So you might have some shock and disorientation and numbness. This isn't a conscious thing that people are doing. It's really just an inherent survival mechanism. So it's happening automatically when there's extreme danger. So an example might be if a victim was held at gunpoint, they might experience a narrowing of that information. So they might only be able to describe the gun, but like the sense of smell might be so strong that it's possible that they could identify the cologne worn by the perpetrator. It's pretty interesting what our bodies do. And then during traumatic events, it's primarily sensory and emotion memory centers that are functioning. So during extreme trauma like rape, survivors might be unable to logically filter that information. So the traumatic experience is stored primarily as emotion and sensory information. So the details and the chronological order, it's probably going to be somewhat out of that range of what you think it would be. A lot of people think that rape survivors should come in and say, well, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and that's just not the way that our brains store information, not during trauma. So it's very common for survivors to be confused. So when a survivor comes in and they are confused and they're disoriented and they're in a crisis, our role is to not get caught up in it. We need to be the calm ones. Take a couple of breaths, stay with her, stay present, cry about it later. You can totally do that. I do that. But while she's there, you're the calm one, you're the stable one, because she needs that. Validate her experiences and let her know that nothing is abnormal. I hate the word normal anyways, but let her know that nothing is abnormal. She is totally normal. Anything that she's going through is normal. And then let her know what to expect, because she might experience these headaches or muscle soreness later. So you can let her know that these things are something that she could expect later. So this quote up the top by Daisy Whitney, she talked about sexual assault and said, "It lives in front of me, behind me, next to me, inside me every single day. My schedule is dictated by it, my habits by it, my music by it." This is really pervasive trauma that just incinerates all aspects of lives. So there's going to be a definite emotional impact. So powerlessness. We work really, really hard to manage and successfully develop our set of coping skills. And when some sort of external event happens that brings up maybe unfamiliar emotions, then we can experience a feeling of loss of control, and it can be overwhelming. So that brings about this feeling of powerlessness. And with that powerlessness can come in and self-reliant and, buck up and man up and all of these different terms that we say. During a crisis, a competent, self-reliant person might have to depend on others, and they might start feeling incompetent. this can definitely make someone feel ashamed. And it really teams up with that powerlessness. And so survivors might feel like they're not able to handle their own problems and that they have to turn to someone else. Anger. There might be a little bit of anger, there might be no anger, there might be tons of anger. It might be directed at themselves, at others, at the listener, at the event. Don't take it personal. It's really just them expressing their anger. You can help them work with the anger. A lot of people are afraid of anger. Like, well, what am I going to do if I get too angry? Anger is really just another emotion. So find ways to appropriately express the anger. Find good outlets for the anger. But it's okay to be angry. What happened was atrocious. It's okay to be angry about it. It really is. But as an advocate, don't take that personal. It's really not about you. It's about this trauma that they've gone through. Ambivalence. So feelings of confusion and uncertainty might come around. As a result, this person might struggle with issues that are brought on with the crisis. So things like independence versus dependence, self-reliance versus relying on others, controlling their emotions versus losing control, an increase in self-confidence by managing for the self, but then risking reaching out for others for help. And then helping or trusting others too much versus a total distrust. You can see these back and forth things going on. Hopelessness. Survivors might feel that they will never get point, this incapacitated feeling. They might not see hope, or they might not see hope in ever recovering or moving beyond this crisis. At this point, they might have some suicidal ideation and talk about ending their lives. Decreased self-image. Self-image kind of goes hand in hand with self-esteem, and it can combine to leave someone really vulnerable. So you'll really want to help them feel empowered. Talk about the strength it took to survive. Surviving isn't something they did passively. We worked to survive. It took a lot of work. Emotionally, they might doubt themselves. They might be hypervigilant, which is kind of being hyper-aware. They might lose trust. They might still have that affection for the offender. They might be feeling fear or shock, denial, that irritability and anger. They might feel like they want to isolate. They might feel unsafe. They might cry at the drop of a hat or never cry, or have emotions like a roller coaster, just up and down. They might have a lot of fear of retaliation, or fear that they won't be believed or that they'll be blamed for the assault. A lot of fear around going to court, too. The court system is really intimidating, so having an advocate by your side is really helpful, just knowing that someone else is there to be at your side. Somebody's got your back, because court is a really intimidating process. There's judges sitting up on their benches looking very official and authoritarian, and then the lawyers who you think know everything, and they're going to try to tear everything down. So it's really important to at least offer to go to court with your survivors. There's a fear that nothing will help and that they're going to blame themselves for everything. They might not label it rape, especially if it's a teen dating violence situation. They might have a hard time wrapping their heads around what happened. And then they might feel a loss of their identity or their sovereignty. So these are all things that you can help as advocates. Socially, your survivor might isolate themselves. 75% of women, just in general, never go to the movies alone at night. And then 50% will not ride public transportation out of fear of rape or sexual assault. So as women, in the back of our heads, this thought is always there. And so then if you have been sexually assaulted, if you weren't going to ride the bus before, you're not going to ride it now. So that fear kind of drives in more isolation. So they might need some help with getting reconnected. They also might kind of drop out of activities that they've been doing or drop out of school if you've got a teen. There could be a situation where it was teen dating violence, the young lady got pregnant, then because of factors like the abuse from her partner and then things like child care issues, she could drop out or stop doing other activities. I worked with one lady who stopped going to powwows because she was afraid that the perpetrator was going to be there. She told me that she was really fake at school, that she didn't have a lot of friends at school, A, because she didn't want them to know, and B, because she didn't want them to get close to her, because she didn't want to be in the position where she had to explain anything. The teachers all thought she was great, that she had this perfect life, and she was struggling inside. And then later she saw her perpetrator at a local DMV and just broke down. So when you're safety planning, safety plan for years later too, how to handle those kind of triggers or seeing your perpetrator out in public. Those emotional triggers that might come up, how to handle those. So maybe she needs to carry around some lavender or something so that she can smell lavender. Whatever works for her for self-soothing when these kind of things just kind of come out of the blue too later. Because this young lady had been assaulted 10 years ago and saw her perpetrator 10 years later. So it happens. Safety planning really works on this social impact. If you can help her feel safe, then she'll be safer to go out in her environment, or she'll feel safer to go out in her environment and continue on with her normal life and her normal activities. The spiritual impact will kind of go along a spectrum. There might be no impact, there might be some impact, there might be a lot of impact, somewhere in between or on both sides. Be aware of this so that you're not surprised when it happens. If they do say things like, why did the Creator allow this to happen? Just know that they're dealing with that trauma. And the more aware you are that it could happen, then the less, taken aback you might be. You can offer to help take her to more spiritual activities. So, I don't know, taking her to the medicine man, or if she wants to smudge, or take cedar baths, or go to the sweats. You can also offer traditional comfort kits. You can offer these things, but always remember that our focus is on her autonomy because her choices were taken away. So we always want to offer choices, but not tell her what, this is what you should do, or this is what, you have to do, those kind of things. This is a choice. This is what you can do if you want to. I definitely think that traditional healing and traditional activities makes a huge difference. So if she's willing to do that, that's great. And it might just take some time too. If she has withdrawn from spirituality, it just might take some time. So that's okay. So shifting over a little bit to LGBTIQ specific. These stats are from the Center on Disease Control, the CDC, and it's from their National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. So for those of you who don't know, LGBTIQ is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered or transsexual, intersex, and then questioning or queer. And I would always tell you to not use the term queer unless someone self-identifies as being queer. Some youth are taking back the term, but some are still very much against it. So only use it when basically you're invited to. Sexual violence is a top hate crime against the LGBTIQ community. So they're going to need your resources and your help. When you're posting on Facebook or your website, use youth accessible and LGBTIQ accessible language. They'll notice what you're posting, and if you put in little things that are friendly to LGBTIQ youth or youth in general, they'll see that you're somewhere where they can go, where they'll be safe. So as an example, avoid listing some sort of biases in your communication with the community. There's a lot of biases out there. I mean, people will think that heterosexual male victims become gay because they were raped by another guy, or that LGBTIQ people are more likely to perpetrate sexual assault, and these biases are just not true. So avoid using those biases and make your place as friendly as possible for these victims. The same intimate partner and sexual violence survey found that bisexual women actually experience significantly higher lifetime prevalence of rape and other sexual violence by an intimate partner when compared to heterosexual women or even lesbian women. And LGBT youth reports 30% incidence of dating violence compared to 9% of heterosexual students. There's a lot of barriers, even for non-LGBTIQ victims. So in the general population, often sexual assault is not reported, especially by children and youth. So children might be too young to recognize the victimization or to put it in words. They might be threatened or bribed by the abuser. So I know a young lady who was a teen mom, and the perpetrator threatened to take away her son. He's like, I'll go to a different reservation, I'll hide him, you'll never know where he is. Or he said that he would have people pray against her and use bad medicine against her. Victims might be confused by fearing the abuser, but also liking the attention. That can happen. That's pretty normal. And validate that for them. Let them know that that's normal. They might blame themselves or be afraid that no one will believe them. They might think that the abuse is punishment for something that they've done. They might feel guilty for possible consequences to the perpetrator. So I've heard of perpetrators saying something like, I'll kill myself if I go to jail, and then the victim is left feeling like, well, I don't want this person to die. I don't want this person to commit suicide because of me. So they'll feel guilty about that, even though it's completely not about them. It's just manipulation. Teens might not want to lose those relationships if they're in a teen dating violence situation. They might also lose friends if they have mutual friends with their partner. There can be like this split where you lose half of your friends or more. They might not want to tell their parents because they don't want parents to be mad at them or be disappointed in them. They might feel like they're being a snitch. There's also misinformation about police and what they can do and judges. And then there's that fear of discrimination by police and judges. And courts typically are not super accommodating to teens, so that can be hard. Then you bring in these credibility concerns that society does, that's victim blaming. So things like, well, was she drinking? What was she wearing? What kind of student is she? This character assassination that happens. Teens are pretty ignorant about laws. I think adults are too, but teens don't know a whole lot about laws and what's legal and what's illegal. So they might not even know that a crime's been committed. Then they're dealing with this denial, like this person, it couldn't have been rape. It's my boyfriend. He didn't rape me. Then the shame of feeling what happened, and then the fear. And then they're just dealing with those trauma effects. So then we jump into the LGBT barriers. As an advocate, we really need to be aware of these LGBT barriers and educate ourselves on LGBTIQ victims. Watch out for different attitudes of practitioners and their biases and their stereotypes, either at your advocacy center or in medical practices or with law enforcement or judges. If it's happening in your own agency, I've heard of a different agency around that once a month they had someone present on a different bias, some group that there's like biases around. So every month someone was giving a presentation in their building about a certain group, and that helped. LGBTIQ people really do feel like they're not going to be understood, so they might not want to come in and get help because they don't want to have to educate everyone on, what does trans mean. They might also be mistakenly seen as the perpetrator, which is really tragic. If a male is assaulted, he could be seen as the perpetrator. When we talk about trans survivors, and really anyone, you can always ask what their preferred pronoun is. This is something that the youth know. They know what this is. And then you can find out how they want to be called. And it's easy. Just what pronouns you prefer or what pronouns you go by. With trans survivors, it's really crucial to use their language to show respect. Some of them can pass, quote, pass on the streets, but not on the exam table. And so they might not want to go to a doctor because they want to avoid that discrimination or even insurance issues. It would be really great if a SANE examiner could use a body-neutral body map when they're doing the SANE exam and they're writing down where, injuries occurred. If it was a body-neutral map, or if they could just alter what they already have available, that's helpful for trans survivors. The LGBT community has their own culture too, and they might not want to report if a member of their community is a perpetrator because of the biases and the stereotypes that float around. They fear that it's just going to hurt their community and that it's going to have a negative impact on their community. So that's a huge barrier. When you think about challenges and barriers to youth and then LGBTIQ youth, plan ahead so that you can develop responses. So you might have to work in different ways or use alternate resources or new partnerships or do specific trainings, but plan ahead so that you can tackle it before it happens, that you're already ready. So these are core rights for victims of crime. Teens have these rights also. So they can go to the criminal justice proceedings, they can apply for compensation, they can participate in the criminal justice proceedings, they need to be informed of what's going on, they need to be protected from intimidation and harassment. They can get restitution, which is like monetary compensation from the offender. They can get their property back that was taken for evidence. They do have a right to a speedy trial. Speedy is kind of a vague term, and our idea of speedy is not really the legal system's idea of speedy. So when you're thinking about your advocacy organization, just think about, are there places outside of your advocacy organization where people can talk about rape? Are there safe places where they can go? Or is it just your advocacy center? And is it a place where people can come and meet and talk about these kind of things? Or is it something that you can go out and talk in the community about rape to do some outreach? And then do victims know that they can come to you for support? Or even if it's informal organizations, you don't have to be, some formal organization with a nonprofit to start, talking circles. If you think about your circle of family and friends, it's really likely that you know enough victims that you can create your own talking circle just because of the high rates of victimization that we're seeing. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Reach out, make yourself available to youth. Use technology to advertise, because that's where they are. They're on technology. Post some relevant stories that might get them keyed in. There's really good news after all of this bad news kind of stuff. Our youth are healing. They're resilient. There's more education now than there ever has been before. Everyone is doing really awesome outreach to get help to more people. Our laws are improving. Services are getting better and more comprehensive. And there's hope. There's a lot of hope and survival. Incorporating those traditional supports helps a ton. Talk to them about resiliency factors, so their talents, their interests, their skills, their capabilities, places where they belong, and then trustworthy adults that they can talk to. And then make it okay for survivors to come in years after assaults. Healing is such a long process. I like to tell people it's kind of like a scar. It's always going to kind of be there. It doesn't really go away because it's just so traumatic. So they might need to come in, 20 years afterwards to talk to someone and make sure they know that they can do that the door's open. I'm just really glad that we have so many people out there making the world a better place. If you're having any issues with getting a SANE examiner in your community, I'm going to type in here. There is an organization called Southwest Center on Law and Policy, and they do SafeStar. And they can do this for communities without the SANE nurse capacity. And what they do is they train community members and healthcare providers on things like first aid and forensic evidence collection. It does not make them into SANE nurses, though. It's really just the best that you can do without a SANE nurse. So it's a really great program. Southwest Center on Law and Policy is also part of NICSA, which is the National Indian Country Clearinghouse on Sexual Assault. And on NICSA's page, you can scroll to the bottom and there's a Find a SANE Nurse button that you can click on to find one that's close to you. Or there's another button where you can find a SANE nurse training. So that's helpful if you need to find some SANE nurse resources. So we have right around 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. And if you think of questions later, my email address is right there. It's wyanet@redwind.net. Well, I don't see anyone typing. So thank you everyone for joining me. I am available for any questions on children and youth issues as you're going along this path to help. So yeah, that's what I'm here for. Any questions that you have, any things that you want to talk through. If I don't know, I'll find you someone who does. Redwind has a lot of resources. We know a lot of people. So yeah, thank you everyone. Take care. Bye.